I'm happy to present this work. So it's joint work with...
Sorry, Hassan. Apparently, I have to ask you if you agree that we record your presentation. You gave already the yes, but I'm not able to do it. So let me... let's hope it's working. Okay, sorry for that. Please.
All right. So this is joint work with Gerard van der Meijden and Cees Withagen, both in Amsterdam. We have a couple of works on the topic of exhaustible resource extraction in the presence of renewables. So this is the latest outcome of this collaboration. So it's from the title, it's meant as a general problem from exhaustible resources, where we have some imperfect competition between some big players, but there's also a small number of players. There's also a number of small players that are not able to exercise market power. And this whole group of suppliers are facing substitutes that do not have any resource constraints. So this is the general setup, but I will try to, I will then quickly make the link with the market of oil, which actually features these elements that I mentioned in the general model. Okay, so as I said, the motivation will be, or the application will be in the oil market, and motivated also by the climate change challenge or climate change problem. So fossil fuels in general are responsible, are major culprits for CO2 emissions, and oil, we are interested in this red line here. So if you see in this graph, from pre-industrial era to now, the evolution is exponential for all these fossil fuels, and oil is not an exception. So oil is one of the important contributors. The other thing about oil is that the reserves are not evenly spread. So some countries have a lot of oil and others have nothing. And this is meant to, I guess, convince you, in case you are not convinced, that this small group of countries here, the blue ones that have more than 80% of the oil reserve in the world, and then there's another group of countries that share this rest of, this 20%. But still, it's very heterogeneous in terms of the location. Another feature that we will seek to capture is that not all oils are equal. So this is the cost per production, and the cost per production varies depending on the type of oil where it's being extracted. So some reserves can be as low as around $10 a barrel, while others here on the right-hand side can be as high as 110. Okay. The other feature here, there's a wealth of data on this. I wanted to share this here. I want to remove
So, Michel, peux-tu fermer ton micro? Guillaume aussi. Michel.
I think, George, you can mute anybody you want to mute.
How can I do it? This is... I don't know. Michel, can you mute your mic?
3714. 3714. Okay. So I was just saying that there's a wealth of data. So for those who are interested in empirical work on this, there's really a wealth of data, provided you have some grant to buy the data, but you can go really at the field level. So what I'm doing in this graph is we have different oil fields, and the data is available on each field, the level of GHG emissions that we have, the estimated cost, and so on. So we have asymmetry, big asymmetries, both in terms of the cost of extraction and in terms of the emissions. Okay. So what we will do in this work is we will build an oligopoly-fringe model that will capture these features. So these features basically a small number of suppliers with market power, a large number of price-taking firms, so that's the oligopoly-fringe part. But the other features that we will include will be stock-dependent extraction costs. So this is to reflect the fact that as you're using or exploiting an oil field, the more you exploit, the more costly it becomes to exploit. We will have a part of the extraction cost that will be convex, also conveying some type of saturation. If you want to extract at a given moment, the extraction costs are strictly convex. And the oil fields are also, or in this case, firms, the carbon emissions are specific to a given group of firms. The other feature we'll include is renewable substitutes. So here we can think of some clean energy coming in at a given constant marginal cost. What we will do is, incorporating all these features, we'll characterize the market equilibrium. And by that, what we mean is for any initial endowment of stocks, for the fringe and for the oligopolist, we will be able to characterize the paths of extraction. From these paths of extraction, we will try to determine the discrepancy of welfare compared to the social optimum. And we will be discussing two effects here that we think are important. And one of them has not been examined a lot in the literature. So the two effects, so it's not surprising that the market outcome in these situations is not socially optimal. But typically we focus on the level of extraction and how the level of extraction from the market outcome is different from the one of the social optimum. But here we will also emphasize another discrepancy, and that's the source of this extraction. So this oil, depending on where it comes from, it accentuates or reduces this imperfection, this inefficiency. Okay, so there's the level effect and there's the sequence effect. So the level effect is the global level of production of the industry, and the sequence effect has to do of where this oil is coming from. Is it coming from the fringe or from the oligopolist? And we will argue that this sequence effect is important. The other thing we will examine is environmental policies, namely here either a tax on carbon or a subsidy to renewables. So it's connected to this substantial literature on the green paradox or orthodox, depending on the outcomes. And basically the green paradox is just saying that, sometimes an environmentally friendly policy that seems environmentally friendly can result in an increase in emissions for different reasons. Here, the main reason is that when you have an environmentally friendly policy, that might render the stock less attractive in the future, and therefore diminishing the value of the stock and pushing the owners of the stock to get rid of them faster than they would have otherwise without the tax. So there's of course big literature on all these issues. I guess the most relevant one is the one related to this sequence effect. So there's now recent papers that look at exactly this issue of the misallocation between oil fields. So again, it's the question that is addressed in these papers is, where did we get this oil, and should we have made some switches, and what could we have saved with that? And the first paper to look at that is Asker et al. In 2019. And they use the data that I just showed, where they really can get to each oil field and the cost from each oil field and conduct I guess an exercise where they would try to reallocate the extractions in a more efficient way, and they show that they can come up with substantial savings for the past extraction that's from 1970, I believe, until the 2000s. There's a more recent paper, so it's still a working paper, but anyway, it's a working paper that examines the same issue that Asker et al. Examined, but they add the environmental damage dimension. So these guys, Asker et al., that's just a production efficiency standpoint. They don't look at the cost of carbon. Here they do include the cost of carbon, and they come up with an estimate of the past of the savings that could have occurred. And you see these numbers are quite substantial. Those two papers are mostly empirical, are basically empirical papers, but they really get into detailed data. On the theoretical front, well, there's some papers that looked at the sources of extraction and how the market will extract depending from which source, depending on capacities and other heterogeneous levels of emissions from each resource. So that's basically these two papers. We have done in earlier work an exercise that looked at this inefficiency from the source of extraction. And the main difference is that we did not include a stock-dependent cost. It was just a simple marginal cost assumption. And this is what we relax here to see how far we get. But the numbers are quite substantial. With the interest of time, there's, of course, a big literature on extraction of resources and the stock-dependent costs, as well in the case of a control, as well as the case of in the case of a game, but they don't look at this oligopoly-fringe story with renewables. And of course, a huge literature on imperfect competition in general in resource markets, but again, they don't look at all these features put together in our model here. So the preview of the results, we will distinguish 5 potential regimes. One we will call F, and that's a regime where only the fringe firms are supplying the market. One is O, so that's only oligopolists are supplying the market. One that we call S, where both the oligopoly and the fringe are supplying the market. And then there's L1 and L2. L1 and L2 are two limit pricing phases. So limit pricing here, we mean by that the price of oil will be just at the level of the renewables. We will have a renewable with limitless capacity that can be supplied at some constant marginal cost. So during limit pricing, the price will be basically equal to this price of renewables. In this limit pricing phases now, we will have two different limit pricing phases, and this is a novelty compared to other papers that had constant marginal cost of extraction. So we'll have a first limit pricing phase that we call L1, and this L1 is basically limit pricing, but not without renewables. So the price is set at the renewables price, but the quantity supplied is coming only from fossil fuel. And then we have a limit pricing phase where we have limit pricing with renewables. So potentially all suppliers are supplying the market. So we will examine different sequence possibilities, but they will always end with L2. So the last phase of this game will always be L2, regardless of the initial stocks that we start with. The other novelty is that we can have simultaneous supply of fuel during L1 and L2. That means both the fringe and the oligopolies can be supplying during the limit phase, which is new given the and is due to the cost that we're using. And we will have now asymptotic economical depletion of fringe and oligopolies. So this is another feature of this model, is that we do not exhaust the resource physically. In this story, there will be some oil that will be left in the ground. How much is left in the ground depends on the cost of extraction and also on the market conditions. This will be an important feature, and this is an important feature also in the political debate about climate change, where we have these stranded assets. Those who own oil will have to keep some of this oil in the ground. In terms of the simulation, so once we characterize the equilibrium, we will run simulations and calibrate the model. What we end up with is a sequence effect of $4.2 trillion and $3.8 trillion. Those are large numbers, but again, our aim is to highlight this sequence effect, which hasn't received much attention in the literature. In terms of the level, as I said, we can expect that the level of the market will not be efficient if we don't have an intervention, but the order of use of the resources is even more important than the level. We'll do some comparative statics, if you wish, so on the interest rate and also on the convexity of the cost. And the last piece of result that we will get is the analysis of green paradox. So there's this literature on whether subsidies to renewables, for instance, will result in an increase in emissions or a decrease in emissions, and some papers have an increase and some papers have a decrease depending on the assumptions you get. In our paper, actually, we get something we get a more nuanced result. The result is non-monotonic in terms of the subsidy rate. So it really depends on where you start from. And given the subsidy, given the level of the renewable cost, if we start with just timid subsidies, then we might end up with a green paradox. But if your subsidies are large enough, then you can escape the green paradox. So this is a description of the main results. Of course, I assume, as usual in this seminars, you're welcome to interrupt as soon as something is, not clear. If you have any comments, I would appreciate it. The model, we have linear demand for oil, and we have identical oligopolists that produce oil. We can so O here, this is an O, and this is for oligopolist. So whenever you see this O, it's referred to an oligopolist. They have a physical stock SOI. Extraction rate at a given time is QIO, and the extraction cost. This is the extraction cost of each firm, and we are introducing this decrease in the cost, marginal cost of extraction, as the stock increases. As we deplete the stock, the marginal cost goes up. And then we have a convex part in extraction. The fringe members, they're also identical. There's NF of them. So small f is for fringe, and the rest of the notation is quite standard. This parameter, again, gamma, is for the is to capture the convexity of the cost. And fringe members are price takers by assumption. So the other passive actors in this story are producers of renewables. They can produce renewables with unit cost B, so the marginal cost of renewable is constant, and the demand is met by fossil fuel and renewables. So we will have QO, QF, and QR. So O is the quantity, total quantity produced by the oligopolist, total quantity by the fringe, and the renewables. There's a discount rate. We will assume we'll have standard assumptions on B and alpha. Alpha is the choke price of the demand. So it's just to say that B is small enough to be actually binding and relevant in case the price goes becomes too large. And B is small compared to alpha, smaller than alpha, but still smaller than any of the cost of the fringe and of the cartel. The notion of equilibrium, we basically extend the notion of equilibrium from the cartel fringe, from the dominant firm or cartel fringe model of, for instance, Salent. And so basically we have a fringe that is price taker. So a fringe member is taking P of T as given. And so this whole path is taken as given, and they're choosing QJF. Okay. The renewables, they are supplying whatever is left at the given price B. So if fossil fuel suppliers are supplying such that the price is above B, then they don't supply anything. If they supply something smaller than such that the price is larger than P, then they can supply up to the level where the price will become P. The oligopolist, each firm is now assumed to take QR of T and QF of T as given, and QJ of all the others beside itself, and choosing QI of T that maximizes its present value of profits. And an equilibrium is when the quantity QO that we will end up with, and the path Q of T and the path QF of T and the path QR of T are such that supply is equal demand at each moment, and the supply of the resources is, the constraint on the resources are met. One last piece of notation is here, as I said, we'll have economic exhaustion of stocks. So some stock will be left in the ground. How much? Well, it depends on your cost of extraction and the market conditions. In this case, the cost of the parameter that will reflect that is such that the marginal cost is just equal. The marginal cost is 0. The first unit of extraction is just equal to the choke price, but here the choke price will end up being B because of these renewables. The price cannot go beyond B. So SF bar is the stock that the fringe will leave in the ground, and S0 bar is the stock that the oligopolist will leave in the ground. And we make this small notation, change of notation. So XIF, so we move from S to X. X is now the economical stock. S is the physical stock. So this is just the notation, and as I said earlier, so we have these 5 phases that we will characterize. Fringe only supplying, then the price is with the price smaller than B. O is for oligopolist only supplying with the price smaller than B. But then we have also S, where both are supplying with the price smaller than B. And then if price is equal to B, then we have limit pricing with either oligopolist and fringe or oligopolist, fringe, and renewables. Now, instead of giving the characterization by a proposition, I think it's better to just use it in or give it in a graph. So I guess the contribution is to examine the equilibrium for each level of stock. So for each vector XO, XF. Okay. So for instance, if we're given XO, so stock of oligopolist, economical stock of oligopolist, if the stock of the fringe is very large, then we'll start with only the fringe supplying. And as the stock is exhausted, so we're moving vertically on this line until we hit this, until we hit this solid line that separates the 2 regions. And here now the oligopolist will start supplying. Both are supplying, but both are supplying below the price of the backstock, below the price of the renewable. So there's no production of the renewable. Here, they cross this line where we now get into the L1 regime. And during this regime now, they're both supplying, still no renewables, but they're limited by the existence of the renewables. So here on this whole region, you don't see renewables being produced, but they're actually playing their role in disciplining the market, and the market cannot go beyond the price of B. And as the stocks diminishes, both the oligopoly and the fringe, then we get into the last phase, and the last region is L2, where we will have both the fossil fuel suppliers, the oligopoly and the fringe, supplying, but now the renewables are also supplying the market. This is all converging to here because we have normalized the economic stock to be 0. So we have economic exhaustion with just a normalization that we're going to 0. Okay, so this is the theoretical part of characterizing the equilibrium. I mean, I could, if we start with another region, for instance, this one here, where we have a lot more, a much bigger stock XO than XF, then it's the oligopolist that will supply the markets alone at a price smaller than B. And then at some point, the fringe will supply, and at some point they will get again into limit pricing and follow this path. All right, so given this characterization, we wanted to actually see what is the size of this distance of this extraction path, or the consequence of it, this extraction path compared to what is socially desirable. So we can see just from this graph that there is an issue here. The issue for an economist worried about efficiency is, for instance, anytime you see this here, S, or even L1, if the costs are asymmetric, so if the oligopolies have a smaller cost of extraction, and they also have a cleaner or less dirty oil, then it's likely that you will suffer some inefficiencies, because you would rather extract from the least expensive more than from the more expensive, and also more from the least dirty, and then from the more dirty. So those are the two sources of inefficiencies that we want to capture, and we want to see in the case of oil, what kind of size are we talking about? Is it really negligible, and the whole problem is about the level of the industry's output, and then we don't worry much about the allocation between suppliers, or is the allocation between suppliers an issue? So for that, I guess any calibration of this type of model with such a parsimonious model is heroic. You have to be brave and willing to just face the wind. But we actually were, I guess, brave enough to go ahead with the calibration. So how this works is you basically have some objective, some target of level of production, and the price that you observe, and the elasticity of oil, and you try to have the parameters alpha, beta, and the cost to match the price of oil, the quantity of oil. The cost of extractions are coming from data on as we saw, so there's some literature on the cost of extraction. The convexity part, so we had to make some assumption about which part of the cost is coming from the cost dependent part, the stock dependent part, and which one is coming just from the strictly convex part. We just used this one here, but we played with it later. We're considering the case of a homogeneous cartel. So N is 1. There's only like all the OPEC members are acting as 1. We will relax this assumption and see how this is impacting the results. The discount rate is, of course, a major parameter here, as in any climate change problem. You know, it plays a huge role. So we took an average. So I guess some are using 5%, some are using 1%. So we went for 2.8. This is based on bonds, government bonds, over some average, and we came up with 2.8. These physical stocks are from the literature, so they actually announce the reserves they have. And those parameters here reflect the emissions that we get from each type of oil. So you see we have here omega O. So omega O is the emissions per barrel of oil extracted, and from the oil fields in the OPEC countries, let's say. And omega F is the emissions from the non-OPEC members. And you see here, these guys are more, this stock is dirtier than that. and the social cost of carbon we use is 250. I think it amounts to something around 60 something US dollars per ton of CO2. So given that, this is where our model gives us. So we start here, and we will be moving along this line here. Okay, so very small. So at this level, the renewables are almost non-existent if you don't have any subsidies. So but then as the stocks dwindle, the cost of extraction will increase, and they will find themselves, these fossil fuel suppliers will find themselves reaching the price of renewables. They will supply the whole market at the price of renewables, but then they will slowly and progressively leave more share to the renewables. In this figure, what we have is now the social optimum, so it's this one here, and the PC is for the case of perfectly competitive scenario where we wouldn't have market power of the oligopolies. So one thing to notice is that even the initial point is changing. So the reason here is that the social optimum will actually consider the damages to the caused by emissions, and therefore will leave more stocks in the ground. So this XO and this XF are actually smaller than the XO and XF that you would see under perfect competition and under the oligopoly. But even in this case, even the social optimum will actually have common supply, and this is because the marginal cost can still be equalized because the costs are stock dependent and are strictly convex. So in order to examine the impact of the sequence of extraction, or the source of where we extract the oil, we will look at one scenario that we call the Herfindahl scenario. Herfindahl because there's a famous result in exhaustible resources that says if you have a bunch of resources that are homogeneous, but they have different extraction costs, constant marginal cost, that you should extract these reserves in the order of their cost of extraction, starting from the least expensive to the most expensive. And you don't start extracting from a stock if something cheaper is still available. So this is the Herfindahl scenario. Here it's slightly more complex because we have costs that depend on the stock. So it is possible to have two stocks being exploited at the same time, but the share that will come from the different stocks will be different. So what we call a Herfindahl scenario is we will characterize the the oligopoly-fringe equilibrium that we have, fix the level of output, and then just readjust the source of extraction such that the costs are minimized. So in other words, if we were to extract the total amount of oil at the same level as the oligopoly-fringe equilibrium, what's the most efficient way to extract this total quantity? This is what we call the Herfindahl scenario, and that allows us to get at what we want, and that is what are we getting just from this reallocation of the extraction, and not from the level of extraction. So those are the extraction paths along the equilibrium. So this is here the total extraction, this dashed line, and it's coming from these two curves. So you see that the sum of these two gives us the one above. Okay, and the extraction from the oligopoly starts like this. It even diminishes and then starts going up. The other fringe extraction is actually going down, and then it dwindles like this. So what happens here at this kink is when we hit the L1. Okay, this is at this moment here, we're just hitting the limit pricing phase. This here is the extraction that we would observe if we followed the Herfindahl scenario. So we would keep the same total extraction as this one. So the top curves in these two graphs are identical. And here what we do is just reallocate extraction between the fringe and the oligopolist in a way that maximizes or that minimizes the cost of extraction. Okay, so you see that if we do extract this total, if we have this total extraction done at the efficient level, then we would extract a lot more from the oligopolist and a lot less from the fringe. This is what we want to measure. This is what we want to examine. What's the welfare impacts of this discrepancy? This graph is just to play with the convexity part of the cost function, this gamma parameter. So if we let this gamma become very small, then we're kind of converging to the case of constant marginal cost. And you see what we have is that typically in the Herfindahl scenario, the fringe should not be supplying at all until we hit this level, and then we move along this way. The marginal extraction cost. So this is the marginal extraction cost along the equilibrium. And we see that, so we have the marginal extraction cost going up for both of them. So the solid line, the solid curve is for the fringe, for the fringe. And this is for the oligopolist. They can start at a smaller marginal cost because they have more cost in their cost parameter and their, yes, because they have more stocks to start with. This was part of the parameterization. And the fringe starts here. Now, if we were to follow the efficient way to produce this total quantity, then we would follow this type of marginal cost curve. We would have a higher marginal cost curve coming from the oligopolist, but a lower marginal cost curve coming from the fringe. And this is the source of the savings. Okay. Now, aggregate extraction. So this now has to do with the level. Okay. So the social optimum is this line here. I hope you can distinguish between these lines. I'm not using colors. So this gray line, this is the social optimum. And the dark line is the oligopoly-fringe equilibrium. All right. So one thing to notice again is that under the social optimum, the area here is much smaller than the area below the oligopoly-fringe, meaning that the oligopoly-fringe equilibrium will end up extracting more physical stock. Okay. As a society, we would like to leave more stock in the ground, but these guys don't leave. These guys leave much smaller stock. So there's more fossil fuel that is being burned. So this in itself is a source of inefficiency. But if we compare to the perfect competition case, then you see that we would have something like this. We would have a much more aggressive extraction, and then here at this phase we hit limit pricing. So basically in this case the renewables kick in and they start taking a bigger share of the market. This on the right hand side is capturing the stock of carbon. So we see here that the oligopoly-fringe is this solid black line, and it's above the social optimum, meaning that there's a much faster accumulation of carbon in the atmosphere. However, if we look at the H is this curve, it's below the one of the oligopoly-fringe, especially here, meaning that we can keep the same level of output, but just by reallocating the output between the fringe and the oligopolies, we're able to accumulate carbon at a slower rate. Now, to get to welfare, we will we will break down welfare into gray welfare. So this is just welfare coming from consumption of oil, both for consumers and suppliers. If there's no, we don't account for the damages. We will account for the damages separately, so we will call them Z. So this is the present value of damages from emissions. And the social welfare is this gray welfare minus the damages. The evolution of carbon is given by this. So this is the amount of emissions per unit of output for the fringe, amount of emissions per unit of output for the oligopoly. So gray welfare, we are here, we're looking at this, so the horizontal line is for R, the discount rate, and WG here is the deviation from the first best. So you see that we can be above or below the first best, and the reason is it's the damages. So here it just means that we're actually consuming too much. We're consuming more than what the first best would prescribe. As a result, we are enjoying more satisfaction as consumers, as producers, but of course, if we consider the damages, then our welfare is smaller than the social optimum. But from a gray welfare point of view, we can also be smaller than the social optimum. So the reason here is that it depends on your R, how you discount the future. So here, if R is very big, then you discount the damages very much, and then you care more about current consumption. And then here, because you have an oligopoly and you have market power, you're enjoying fewer consumer surplus and the smaller surplus. Climate damages. Now, climate damages. What can we say here? So again, let's start at 0.028. So this is the benchmark R that we chose, but we can look, the results are fairly consistent for other levels of R. So here it's deviation from the first best. Okay, so the damages under the first best and the damages under the different scenarios. So with PC, perfect competition, we would have 60% more damages than the first best. Okay, you have overpollution, makes sense. Under the oligopoly-fringe, we will have smaller damages than perfect competition, but still substantially more. I mean, 50% or 55 or 56% more than what is socially desirable. And now the Herfindahl scenario. So this, again, this is a scenario where we keep the total level of extraction the same as the oligopoly-fringe and just readjust extraction between the suppliers. And we see that we can actually reduce climate damages from 55% to something below 50%. So that's like a 6 or 7% decrease in climate damages. And this decrease it gets more important. So this difference between this lower curve and the medium curve is just due to the sequence effect. And this is getting bigger as R gets bigger. And now the net result. So the net result is on actual total welfare. So this is what we care about the most. So this is deviation with respect to the first best. So under perfect competition, we would be here. So it would be this middle curve. So we are maybe, let's say, 5-point-something% below the first best. Under the oligopoly-fringe, it's a lot worse than perfect competition. We are almost, 9-something% from the first best. Now, okay, so this is, a big inefficiency. Now, what is the source of this inefficiency? Is it the level or is it the source of extraction? This is where we play with the Herfindahl scenario. If we readjust output, the same output that we have along this curve, but now use this fuel or this extraction more efficiently, then we would be on this curve here. And this is, you see that we would move from something like a loss of welfare of almost 10% to a loss of welfare around 4%. So this sequence effect plays a big role. This is welfare loss in the oligopoly-fringe due to the sequence effect as a function of the discount rate, and it gets bigger and bigger. The role of convexity diminishes that because it kind of introduces some capacity constraints on the suppliers, including the oligopoly. It reduces the sequence effect, but it's still quite substantial. So it's still in the neighborhood of 35-37%. Now, market power. Market power tends to attenuate this issue of the sequence effect. So here we play with n, the number of oligopolies. So we have assumed so far that these OPEC are all acting as a perfect cartel. We know that they have issues between themselves, and there's different ways to capture this imperfect cartelization, but one way is to assume that they're behaving like an oligopoly. So depending on NO, this is different levels of N that we can assume, and as N increases, we're getting closer to perfect competition. So this is welfare under perfect competition. This is this flat line. And as N increases, we're getting closer and closer to this flat line, but from below. However, if we readjust the source of extraction, we will be converging to perfect competition, but from above, and getting closer to this upper line. So here there is a line. I hope you can see it. It's a gray line, and it's the social optimum. So even with an oligopoly, so you see some papers have established that OPEC can best be modeled as more like a duopoly, given the fact that people don't agree. The outcome of OPEC is more like the outcome of a duopoly, but if you do that, then the sequence effect, that the share of the loss of welfare due to the sequence effect is actually moving from 55%, but still at 2, you're still at 45%, and even at 10, you're still at 10% of the loss in welfare. This is few words on the green paradox. So here we play with B. If you recall, B is the cost of the renewables. So this vertical line is the level of B that we use in our parameterization. So in our calibration. So you see that if we decrease B, for instance, by subsidies to renewables, total emissions will go up. It's the initial emissions of the market will go up. So that's the green paradox. Okay. So, however, not all sources are reacting the same way. So the dark curve is the fringe. The fringe will actually increase its output, but the oligopolies will start by decreasing their output. Another thing to notice is that these things are not monotonic, which means that if you reduce B by some subsidy to renewables, if you're going to do it in a very progressive way, then you might be hurting yourself by accumulating carbon more quickly. You need actually substantial decrease in B. For instance, here from B that was around 108 or something like that to something below 70% to start reducing the total level of emissions. All right, so what we are working on is the actually it's none of the ones listed here. What we are working on is the situation where we would have Stackelberg leadership of the oligopoly. It could be a natural assumption that OPEC is playing the role of a leader, and we want to understand what is the impact of this leadership and how it affects this sequence effect and its importance. I'm sorry I took too much time. I'm not sure. I hope there's some time for questions. Otherwise, I'm available to answer questions.